everybody, welcome back to the Willowrun Life. I'm Kiera, and today we're going to be talking about LSAT prep, what I did for LSAT, that kind of thing. I got a lot of questions from a decent amount of people that have asked me how I studied for the LSAT, and because I kind of did my own thing that I'll tell you more about in this video, it's a little bit hard to explain really quickly. So I thought I'd show you guys how I prepped for the LSAT and kind of the methods that I used to get into my law school. So let's get into it. Okay, so for me, I knew that I wanted to go to law school fairly late. My parents would say that they were not at all surprised that I decided to go into law because I was a mini lawyer from a very young age and very vocal about advocating for myself even before I had chronic illness and disabilities. But I decided fairly late that I wanted to go to law school. So I was initially on a pre-med track. Really hadn't gotten into it that much, but kind of knew fairly quickly that it perhaps wasn't the best thing for me. I knew I wanted to go into healthcare after my experiences with chronic illness in college. I knew I wanted to go into law. I knew I wanted to go into healthcare, but I wasn't quite sure the best way to go about it. Should I go to med school? Should I pursue a master's in public health or something along those lines? And then I was watching a show about lawyers and decided, well, I never really thought about law school. Maybe that might be a good option for me. So I made the decision in kind of March, late March, early April, and took the LSAT that year in September, and then was admitted into my law school in December. So it was pretty quick, and I think for me, I really felt, like I've said in my other videos, I'm a very faith-forward person, and I really felt like once I had made the decision to go into law school, all the doors kind of opened and things fell into place much quicker and easier than they had when I was on the pre-med route. I prepped for the LSAT for about 6 months. I know for some people that seems pretty long. I know some people prep for a year, and I think I had 6 months was good for me because I had reached a point in my prep toward the end where I was like, okay, I think I've hit the max of how much I could possibly prep for this. Felt pretty ready to go by the time I took it. I initially bought some books off of Amazon because I'd read some things that those might be a good idea. Those didn't really work out for me. That was the Power Score series. I knew when I was doing research about the particular ways to prep that I wanted to do mostly self-study. When I was doing research about the prep companies, something that I noticed really quickly was how expensive they were in comparison to the scores that people were getting. And I read a lot of Reddit boards. Go into the Reddit boards with a grain of salt. Some of these people really have an attitude about themselves, but the information I got from there was good in the sense that I learned fairly early that prep courses maybe weren't the way to go, or traditional prep courses like Kaplan weren't the way to go. They were very expensive and people were walking away with only minor point increases, and I knew when I had taken my first practice test, what my basic score, my initial score was, and I knew where I needed to get to the school, and I knew that, a couple points weren't going to help me. I needed to make a 10, 15 point increase. And so when I was doing my research, the best way to do that was to do kind of a flexible self-study plan and really nail down what your areas for improvement were, and then focus on those areas really heavily. So I bought the Power Score series. A lot of people really liked those. I found them way too detailed for me, and it was jumping head first into an area where I had no prior experience. Because my undergraduate was medical anthropology, I came into it with not a lot of knowledge surrounding, the logic games, that kind of stuff. I think the people that really do well off the bat with the LSAT are the people that have a logic philosophy background, because a lot of the LSAT revolves around this logical reasoning, logic games basis. And so for me, because I didn't have that, my dad was a theology, studied a lot of theology, and so I had that kind of experience growing up with a theologian in the house and some basic background of logic and common sense that's not really common. But I didn't really fully know like what I was getting into. And so for the Power Score series, it was way too much detail for me, like way too quickly. And I knew that I needed something that would give me a lot of background knowledge, so then I could figure out the areas that I needed improvement and then really deep dive into those areas. So for me, that was LSAT Trainer by Mike Chen, I believe his name is. I'm going to put a little video up here of me going on my browser and showing you on Amazon the book, because that's where I bought mine, and then also showing you the next thing that I did. So I read his book. It's fabulous. It's great. It gives you a lot of really good background knowledge, but for me, it gave me that background knowledge. It gave me the areas that I knew I needed to focus on, but it didn't give me enough information on how to improve in those areas. So for me, that was logical reasoning and logic games. I need a lot of help in those areas, and his book wasn't giving me enough information for that, especially when I was taking practice problems and I needed to know specifically where I was going wrong, and I couldn't find that kind of information. So then I found this next prep kind of resource. So that's 7 Sage. You'll see in my little video that I go to 7 Sage. They are fabulous. So they're considered kind of this in between. At least when I was using them, they were considered in between. Now I think they've kind of established themselves a bit more as a prep course, but they're competitors with Kaplan and some of the other preps, but they're also competitors with PowerScore and Blueprint and some of the other self-study methods that you will see. So they're a really good in between. They're online and they give you so much information. Like, that was the biggest resource, I think, for me. I was able to find explanations for everything. Their plans have changed a little bit since I took the test in 2018. I actually think their prices have decreased a decent amount from when I bought them, and their plans have also simplified. So the things that made like the Ultimate Plus plan when I bought it are now, those characteristics are now in cheaper plans. But I highly recommend that because it gives you explanation for everything, and it really walks you through the logic games, what you're doing wrong, what you need to be improving upon, and the areas that you need to focus on to get better. So that was the biggest resource for me. That combined with the LSAT Trainer was huge, and it really helped me improve and get better over time. I committed about an hour to 2 hours per day studying for the LSAT, and that was for 6 months. Like I said, I took breaks here and there. I'm a big believer in breaks. You'll see that in my law school videos as well. If you don't take breaks, you're gonna burn out quickly, and it's a marathon, it's not a race, especially if you decide that you're gonna do it over a long period of months, which I recommend. You need to do it slowly and gradually. And what I did was I kind of built up. The closer I got to the test, the more work I was putting in on the weekends and that kind of thing. And I was in college full time when I was prepping for it, but I wasn't like working a job or anything like that. I had an internship, but I was getting academic credit for it. So I was able to really split my time between LSAT studying and doing my college homework. And I think for me, the hours made a huge difference. It really allowed me to kind of sit with certain things. And sometimes you just need time for like your brain to adjust to that way of thinking. There's some research out there that indicates that studying for the LSAT does change the way you think, much like law school changes the way you think, but you have to put enough hours in order for that to happen. I believe it's at least 100 hours. And so you've got to put those hours in order to see the improvement in your score. I did have a pretty good improvement. I improved 15 points in practice and then 10 points when I took the test. And that was in 2018 when they were switching over to a harder format for the logic games. So the improvement I made was pretty dramatic, I think. And I think that it would have only been possible for me to do that self-study. And the money is worth it to me. Like, you know, 7 Sage combined with the LSAT Trainer is pretty inexpensive. I would also recommend, I think when I did 7 Sage, they give you all of these, but if they don't give you all of them, you can buy LSAT prep books too, which are the old tests like put together in a book. And I recommend those. Those are pretty inexpensive, and just take as many tests as you can possibly take over and over and over again and do them timed. I also had a little watch that I bought at the end that I made sure I cleared it with the testing center so that there was no issues, because they only allow like certain watches on the exam, but basically it was like a timer, and it was not digital, which is I think the biggest thing for them is that it like can't be digital, but you just wound it up, and basically it was a timer, and it allowed you to see green, yellow, red, and so the time that you should be like wrapping up your sections. So that was like a huge help for me that I highly recommend as well. It broke like 2 seconds after I took the exam, but that was fine. Like by that point I was done. So that was kind of the way that I prepped for the exam. Yeah, the biggest advice that I can say is just do problems over and over and over again. The logical reasoning section for me did not click until like 2 days before the exam. I kid you not. I finally had this light bulb moment of like, oh my gosh, that's what they want me to see when I'm answering these questions. And that ended up being my highest scoring section on the exam. So I was pretty proud of myself for that. That was where I saw the most dramatic increase. My logic games were doing really well. And then when it got to the exam, that was the section that they had actually started to change. And so the games that I practiced on, spent a lot of time on, were not the games that they had in the test. And so it made it that much harder. Now, I think because it was 2 years ago, and it was right around the time, like Seven Sage said this in their prep videos as well, it was right around the time where LSAT thought that their logic games were getting too easy, and so they decided to make them harder. I think now in 2020, since that change has been made for a few years now, that all the kind of prep companies have caught up to that and are now teaching like the new method of doing the logic games. But that was one thing that disadvantaged me a little bit, was that transition. And I know for a lot of med students, because I have a lot of friends that are med students, the MCAT made a similar change around the same time, and it threw them off when they took their test as well. So, you know, I'm a little biased, but I think like if I had taken it like a year before that change had really like started to come into play, I probably would have scored slightly better, and because the logic game section was the section that like threw me off the most, that I had done best in practice, but threw me off the most in the real test. The last thing that I would recommend, and this kind of goes out to everybody with chronic illness that has, or disabilities that have accommodations at their college and are predicting they're going to need accommodations on the test, put those accommodations in really early. So this is a little bit of a different tip from the LSAT prep side of things, but when you're taking the LSAT, this is kind of the added thing that you need to think about. If you have accommodations through your school, apply for those accommodations extremely early. I think I applied for my accommodations in May, and I took the test in September. LSAT requires a lot of paperwork, especially if you're asking for like time extensions. I recommend accommodation for the test if you have them through your school, but you're going to need to apply for them very early, and you're going to need a lot of doctor's paperwork. So the thing that I ended up doing was actually sitting with my doctor and going through the paperwork together, and then she could fill it out and kind of come up with what she thought were good recommendations for me, and then sign off on it then and there. And then you have to send that over to LSAT with your paperwork for your college accommodations, I believe, and then they put it through a review board, and they get back to you with whether they approve the accommodations and then what accommodations they approve. So they were really great with me. I took my test at a local law school. I don't think I took it at the same time as, I know because my times were different, that I didn't take it at the same time as everybody else, but I don't even know if like there were any other people taking the LSAT at that time. And I had like an individual proctor that just kind of watched me and was super nice and awesome, and I could take breaks when I needed to. I could eat when I needed to. They were really great. So highly recommend that. Yeah, I think that is the biggest thing, of knowing your body and knowing like what works for you. And I don't think the LSAT is the type of test to like rush practice for. I've heard of people that have done it, but they're the people that test in very high and they only have a few points that they need to kind of, you know, boost up. Whereas for me, I tested in at like the average and I needed to boost that up more. And I don't think you'll see that change unless you put the time in to do that. I wish you guys the best of luck when you do take it. You're going to do a great job. Remember that your performance on test day is going to be different than practice, because you're not in your home, and even though you try to simulate that experience, it's not going to be the same experience. But it will be okay, and you'll get there. It can be very frustrating sometimes prepping for the LSAT, but you just have to be patient with yourself and know that those changes take time, and that's okay. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. video, make sure to like and subscribe. If there's any kind of content that you want to see in the future that you want to let me know about, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd love to read them and see what you guys say in terms of recommendations. I hope you guys have a great day. Remember that you can do this and you will do a great job. Bye, everybody.